Welcome back to the Raw Selection Private Equity Podcast. Joining us today is a familiar voice of Jordan Burton from Talgo, a firm training leaders and private equity investors on hiring and interviewing. Obviously, a particular area I am massively passionate about with running Raw Selection executive search firm, but we're going to dive into the process of interviewing, how to prepare for that, how to interview better, and then obviously how to do that wash up and improve your percentage of success rate, which typically from the smallest to the largest private equity firms is below 30% of success on portfolio executive hiring. This links in with just about, or we have released, depending on when you're listening to this, a book, How to Hire, which is focused on private equity, training you on how to hire and interview executives for your portfolio company. Without further ado, let's dive in, because this is an absolute exceptional podcast. So Jordan, let's deep dive into interviewing, assessing candidates, and preventing churn into the portfolio. So give us an insight. Let's start the journey as we would do before we hit the interviewing. What should somebody be doing prior to an interview with a portfolio executive that will help them with the assessment and understanding of that candidate?
What a great question. First of all, wonderful to be back. Let's get into it. And I think you asked a great question that a lot of people don't ask, which is, what do I do before I'm in front of a candidate? Because I think that's where the biggest missed opportunity is, or where I see a tremendous amount of mistakes, is doing nothing or doing very little. I'll take a few things that I would do before you're in front of that candidate. One is, let's make sure we have a crisply defined role. And that needs to take the form of like, here is the investment thesis. Here's what that means for this executive. And like, let's get a short list of here's the things they need to get done. And here is the traits or qualities that matter most in this role. Not the generic, like, we need a strong leader. Like, I've heard too many investors say, we need a strong, I don't know what that means. That could mean many things to many people. What specifically would a strong leader do? What would they get done? If you've got that crisp definition, and by the way, that needs to be a shared definition across all stakeholders. So if there's an independent director in there, if there's another investor in there, if there's an operating partner that you're working with as an investor, let's make sure that we're not looking for different things, because we're not setting somebody up to succeed. The second thing before we see a candidate, what role am I playing in the assessment process? If you don't know what role you're playing, that's a problem. If you don't know, others probably don't know. And what that means is everyone is going to do a one-size-fits-all generic, let's try to cover everything. Tell me about yourself. What would you do in your first 90 days here? What interests you about this role? How do you think about these very sort of generic questions? And what you're going to have is candidates are going to play back what they've heard in other interviews. They've rehearsed these stories. They've rehearsed their responses. They've refined them based on the feedback they've gotten from your colleagues. So know your role. My role is to go deep on metrics. We know that in this particular company, it's been a founder-led business that didn't have a lot of metrics. We know that to get it to the next level, we need to install a lot of metrics and be managing in a more quantitative manner. Maybe that's the role that I play, as opposed to my colleague who's going to go deeper on some aspect of innovation or product development. There's some critical component to the deal thesis there. So we should each be specialists, and we should have clarity on what items on that to-do list we're going after. There are other things as well, but I'll say those are the two biggest missed opportunities that I see.
So let's I absolutely agree. I think so if we dive into the thinking part, because I think that needs more attention from everyone. You know, the private equity investors that we speak to are very generic with the criteria of person that they need. I haven't seen a job spec yet that hasn't got the term self-starter. And I interview executives all the time that are not that. And so if we think about, so my frame around this and my push would be really strong scorecard that assesses the beginning, middle, and end of an investment hold period.
Yeah.
It would be centered around the strengths and weaknesses of the current executive team. So assessing, we've got a chief exec, we've got a CFO who's really industry strong, understands the industry inside and out. therefore we may not need a CEO that needs that. You still probably will, because private equity, you need diversify risk, and why not? Hey, but
Sure.
it gives us those alternatives to go, here's priorities. But the full assessment of everything that's required during that period of time, and then a full assessment of what actually we believe an A player candidate looks like. And that's usually deranged from current portfolio companies, current executives, traits, etc., and how you measure those traits and how they demonstrate them. And then I'd probably say latterly driving into culture. Now, I've really holistically overviewed that from my perspective, but what else would you think about from there with regards to building out that scorecard, maybe questions to ask oneself to
Sure.
really get a good understanding?
I'll add one thing and I'll caution to not add another thing. The other thing I would add is, what are we like as investors? Look at the patterns of the execs you've backed in your past. You are going to find that there are certain things that regardless of the individual sector, deal, thesis, there are things that make somebody work well with you, especially if you are an operationally involved, more hands-on type of an investor. You're part of the mix too. You're part of this executive success or failure. So I have worked with one private equity fund for many, many years where they are exceedingly quantitative, very, very much so. And they need highly numerate leaders. They don't necessarily need to be the most brilliant strategic thinkers, but they can't show up in the boardroom and not be on top of their numbers. It's a non-starter for them. Let's encode those things. Let's take those 2 or 3 things that we know are going to be true regardless of the context of the deal and include that as well. What I would not include, and what I think is the most overused part of that content in defining the role, is we need someone who has been there, done that, 2 or 3 times. We need a CFO who's seen 5x this scale. We need somebody who has this many of years doing this exact kind of a role. When you do that, so by the way, when people do that, that's not really what they need. They want someone who's going to succeed in this role. And they're using that as a proxy. They're saying if somebody's done something like this before, that probably means they're good. The challenge is that when you make your criteria, you need to have already done this job or a bigger one multiple times. You're essentially saying, my criteria is I only want people who are willing to make a lateral or downward move. How many high-performing execs do you know that are eager to make a downward move, right? So I always caution investors when you're thinking about that scorecard to not overfill it with experience as a proxy for results. Be open to people who may not have done this exact role, but who are on a steep upward trajectory. We want somebody who has demonstrated their ability to take on new challenges and do so effectively. If you make it, you've been there, done that, you're going to find a lot of people who've been there, done that, and they're not that great, right? I think I certainly see with search execs, I know a lot of them, and you could speak to this. There's a little bit of wariness of saying we want to set our sights for somebody so far beyond what this role really entails, and it's very hard to attract the right kind of talent.
Yeah, I mean, there's compensation issues. There's obviously people wanting larger revenues, more responsibility, more exposure, larger payouts, equity deals, etc. And you don't tend to get that for going down rounds from where they've been. So, yeah, that's really interesting, actually. And I think that's really insightful. So, once we've done those steps, we've explored our scorecard, we've built that out, we've identified the role and the part for each individual is going to play. The thing that I would add for that as well is what we advocate for every private equity firm to do is to create some kind of level of recording, and I don't mean actually recording the conversation, but of the information to then pass on to the next person. Um,
100%.
is there anything, because then you're not asking the same question of, oh, what's your reason for leaving? Oh, what's this? Oh, what's your reason for leaving? And then the guy at the end who asked the question last and goes, what questions do you have for me about the business? And he's like, I've spoken to 19 people. I don't know if there's any other question about your private equity. I literally had this in a process, and
Yeah.
the guy went, he didn't ask me anything about the private equity firm or the portfolio company. And I was like, he has, I think it wasn't 19, I think it was 11. I was like, he has spoken to 11 people prior. Some of them have been in the portfolio company, all of them have been in the private
Yes.
equity firm. I don't know how many questions you could possibly have left from there. They ended up discounting him, and I was like, you can't discount him on that, but it was what it is. So, is there anything else that you would advise from a prep perspective to
Yep.
go? this could also be standout?
All of the prep we've talked about so far has been something that can be done offline at any point in time. It should be part of your dialogue with your search partner if there's one involved. But there's also prep that's like right before the moment. And this is going to get this gets a little into the art of it. I would say don't put this interaction with this exec right after a very heated discussion with a lender or a colleague or somebody else that might run long or that might put you in this distracted state. I would say give yourself a buffer before that interaction. These are the most important decisions you're going to make this year. Who you choose to back and who you don't. This is going to make or break you. So do yourself and do your calendar the favor of giving yourself some time to get in the zone a bit. And what does that mean? For me, when I'm about to do an exec assessment, I want to spend some time just kind of getting in my naturally curious place into a place where I feel my energy is up, that I'm inquisitive, that I'm well fed and well rested. I just want to be in a good state. And then right before the interaction, let's go look through this person's background, not necessarily to formulate our questions. We should probably have already done that, but just something that stokes our curiosity. Look at this interesting pattern of how this person's life and career is unfolded. I'm so interested to get to know them. What this does, when you're in that curious place, when you've gotten yourself in that more energized, I'm excited to hear about this person, you're going to get the 2 or 3 stories that you wouldn't have otherwise gotten. You're going to go you're going to be able to go deeper. You're going to get more insight. You're going to get way more data if you come from a place of legitimate interest and curiosity. We pretend that we're all senior leaders, like this is all just about the business and the facts. No, we're actually human beings. And we respond to a person who cares about our story. And if you can really facilitate that, it's rapport. If you can create that sort of magnetism with another person, not only do you get better data, they have a better experience too. If you want to win over an exec and not have to overpay for them, create an experience for them where like, these are the people I want backing me. These are the kinds of investors that I really want to work for. They're human. They're interested. I feel connected to them. That stuff matters.
Leads me to something. One of my 3 rules of hiring is to sell the opportunity and sell the business. And you're leading into that. One of the effects of that research beforehand and that reviewing can create what I call the halo effect, which is what interviewers should be wary of with candidates who create familiarity with regards to, oh, we do sport, or yeah, our kids do the same thing, they went to the same university, all that kind of stuff. But you can also use that as an interviewer to begin to build a further relationship. Oh, I see that you worked at X, Y, and Z. I know the guy that used to do that. Oh, did you go to X university? Yeah, I know a guy who used to go there. He said the sport was amazing, and you begin to build familiarity with the individual, and that research happens. What's your take on that kind of preparation from the selling of your opportunity? Because we talk a lot about assessment of individuals and how to find the right exec, but then we also get to the end and the other exec's got 3 opportunities and we're number 3 because we
Yeah.
haven't sold.
Yeah. Love this question. I do have a position on this. It's a pretty strong one. I think that the mistake I see a lot of investors make, I see this more in venture than I do in buyout, but I see it on both sides, is that we so aggressively weave selling into the dialogue that we don't have a crisp agenda in these interactions. So I think there is a risk of overselling. There's a risk of making this all about pushing an opportunity, push. I think it is critically important to sell it, but let's not jump into the interaction pushing a sales pitch for a couple reasons. One is we haven't learned about this person and let them tell us what they're looking for. Let's actually learn about them and their career path and what they're interested in. And then when it's time to sell, our message can be much more targeted. I feel investors often feel like there's a comp, there's an equity upside opportunity in this deal. And that's my hammer, and every candidate is a nail. And I'm just going to push that message. Maybe motivating to you, but you'd be surprised. A lot of great operators are motivated by learning and growth, autonomy, about human connections and team building and culture. Like there's other elements that are going to appeal to them. Learn of it before you go there. The other thing is when you start with a hard sell, I think for a lot of high performers, there's almost an instinctive, what's the catch? It can sound a little bit desperate. It could sound a little bit like, you haven't even gotten to know me yet, and you're already trying to tell me this thing is the greatest and you want me to do it. Um, it feels a little bit like I want to be in an environment, I want to be working with people who are selective. I want to make sure that the other execs you brought into this company have also been through a process. So have the courage to assess rigorously. If you do it from a place of high rapport and connection and fascination, that actually is more enticing than poor rapport and a sale message the whole time. It really is. But by all means, sell. I would just say make it tailored. And I would say in most real interviews, I do that more at the end than the beginning. Leave plenty of time for their questions, to have the dialogue, to talk about, to reflect on what you've learned and weave that into what you're sharing about the position. Just be careful about blasting that message up front.
So you mentioned about the what's being sold and the alternatives there. I think there's too many private equity firms that sell on the basis of business is private equity backed. When they want a private equity backed executive, they're like, well, surprise. Too many firms that sell on the equity. One of the things I would recommend on diversification of on basically how do you separate